Hello and welcome back to another GCSE revision videos. Now I want to go over the worst 10 words that GCSE students always use every single year in their essays that not only drives the teachers absolutely insane, but also it costs them valuable marks as it leads to their essays sounding weak, informal, and they simply don't sound like they have a strong grasp on what they're writing on. If you are guilty of using any of these words, I will obviously be giving you alternatives to use instead, and make sure going forward, after watching this and becoming wiser, you don't use these words. These words are on a banned list for teachers, okay? And of course, if you use this in your exams, examiners will absolutely detest what you have written. So let's get into it. What are the 10 worst words you must absolutely avoid in your GCSE English essays? Number 1, a lot. I even see this written a lot of times by my own students. Avoid, avoid, avoid. Instead of saying there are a lot of people, the writer wants to talk about a lot of ideas. Instead, what you should be talking about is this term, numerous. You can even go a bit more fancy and say a plethora of people or numerous people. Avoid using the word a lot. Number 2, things. There were many things. There's so many things that the teacher wants to talk about. There's so many things that the author wants to talk about. Avoid this, okay? So avoid using the word things when you're talking about what an author is conveying in their writing, and instead say the following. Ideas. For instance, if you're writing about a text, let's say it's a literature text, of course, the ideas that the author is conveying, you need to discuss. Don't say that they're writing about things. Also, for example, are you maybe talking about themes that the author is trying to convey, or symbols? Avoid using the word things. Number 3, really. That was really hard. The writer really wants to show us this. Avoid. Instead, what you should say is extremely, or even, pro tip, profoundly. And of course, if you ensure you're spelling these words correctly, not only will this impress your teachers, but once more it's showing that you have a really strong handle and a strong grasp on what you're writing about. Next word is nice or good. The author wants to describe a really nice setting. This person was being a good person. Don't use this language. It is overused. It is tired. These words are really, really basic and simple. Your teachers will not be impressed if you're using them. Instead, talk about, for instance, instead of describing a character as nice, you can say that they are benevolent or virtuous. Next word, shows. And this is often used, and sometimes even I'm guilty of this during my GCSE masterclasses, and sometimes my students even have to correct me in my live classes when I say I take a quotation and then I talk about the writer shows, and my students will be like, "Miss, no, aren't you supposed to be using a slightly more ambitious word?" And I say, "Yep, absolutely." And instead, what I always tell my students, and of course even when I'm guilty of this, I always have to correct it. What does the writer imply? What does this convey? Instead of saying this shows, mention how this implies, this suggests, this conveys. This usually is when students take a quotation and then they're unpacking it and explaining, they always use the word this shows, this shows, this shows. Use instead this implies, this conveys, this highlights. This is great because it also shows some really nice analysis that you're now starting to launch into. The next word is I think, okay? And in fact, it's 2 words. I think, I think, I think. And students tend to use this phrase when they are interpreting literature. I think that the writer has said this because blah, blah, blah. Number 1, this sounds informal. Number 2, sounds like your own opinion. And number 3, you don't really show very much sophistication in your analysis. Instead, what you should do, instead of using I statements, and I always mention this in my GCSE masterclasses and even in my upcoming literature one-off masterclasses, where I'm going to be going over Macbeth, Christmas Carol, Inspector Calls, and so on. I always tell my students, move away from I statements. I think, no. Avoid I statements and instead use third-person pronouns or omniscient narrative, okay? So in other words, say that the writer implies. So when you're analyzing something, instead of saying, I think this, I think the writer is trying to say this, I think that, no, say we can infer as readers. Or you could also state the writer implies that. Avoid I statements in your writing and in your analysis. The next term, or the next 2 terms, are happy or sad. The person was really happy, the person was sad, or even in your creative writing. You might be talking about a really happy character or a really sad character. These words are so rinsed, they are overused, they are tired. Your teachers literally have seen them hundreds and hundreds of times throughout the years. They are tired of seeing these basic language. Instead, what you want to say is, if you're talking about somebody that's happy, you can talk about them being content. Or if they are sad, you could describe how they are melancholic. The next terms are nowadays, or even when students are talking about and they're analyzing, talking about, say, for example, a text written long ago, and then they'll say, in this text we can see that, this happened long time ago, and nowadays we don't do this, right? This is informal, basic language. Do not use the word nowadays if you're talking about today, in today's society, and you want to contrast it with what was happening long ago, or for whatever reason you want to talk about today's modern society. Instead of saying the word nowadays, use this term. In contemporary society or in modern society. Do not say nowadays. The next term, number 9, is a bit. When you talk about how the writer shows that the character is a little bit stressed, is a bit unhappy, again, this is taking it into informal territory. You don't show that you have a strong grasp on what you're writing about. Instead, mention the term somewhat, okay? This is when you're using tentative language to analyze. And the final worst term is basically or literally. Again, we tend in spoken language to say literally. Again, once more, I'm also guilty of using the word literally when I'm communicating with somebody. That's literally really difficult. That's literally. This is what we use, and we call it fillers in terms of our spoken words, right? Words that really don't mean very much, but we use it as fillers in our language. Try to avoid using the word basically or literally. Basically, the author is trying to say, the author literally wants to show us, no, this is taking it into conversation territory. And I don't actually have an alternative word because it's a filler term. Just don't use it, okay? And so guys, I hope that really helps in terms of the worst words that students tend to use over and over again in the essays every single year that drives teachers insane. As of course you are getting familiar with GCSE English and obviously strengthening your writing, you want to move away from this type of terminology and you want to start making sure your essays are closer to using this type of terminology. Thanks so much for listening.